The lead flight attendant stood in the center of first class, her voice rising just enough to make sure everyone could hear. "This is the last time I'll say it. If you refuse to move to the back, I'll have no choice but to call security." Her tone tightened, each word hissing through clenched teeth, her eyes laced with bias, her posture steeped in authority, but that authority was about to collapse. Ava Sinclair, the black woman seated in the front row, lifted her head, her gaze calm, almost chilling. "I already told you. I'm not going anywhere." Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but carried the weight of someone used to commanding where others only dared to whisper. The cabin fell silent. No one expected the woman in the dark navy blazer, with no heavy makeup, no flashy jewelry, to have the audacity to push back. No one, not even the flight attendant, knew that this woman was the owner of the very jet they were standing in. This story began with a condescending glance, a cutting remark, and a slap in the sky. But it didn't end there. Because this time, the woman they tried to humiliate was the one with the power to change everything. The sleek jet sat motionless under the midday sun, like a silver panther at rest not from exhaustion, but because it knew it was fast enough to never need to run. Its platinum finish shimmered, reflecting each passenger's ascent up the stairs with the elegance of a choreographed procession, silent yet commanding. The door stood open, and the ivory leather-lined staircase stretched from the clouds to the earth, not just to board the plane, but as a ritual, a passage from one social tier to another, where worth was measured in silence, glances, and the first champagne served after takeoff. Inside first class, the cabin whispered luxury. Every stitch on the cream-toned Italian leather seats had been sewn by hand. The ebony wood tables were polished to a mirror's sheen, reflecting the lights above like still water. Crystal glasses, thin as morning mist, sat beside chilled champagne already poured, as pristine as if no hand had ever dared touch them. And the scent? A perfect blend of white jasmine, bergamot orange, and leather, the kind of luxury that didn't announce itself loudly, because in this space, no one needed convincing. This was a place designed to make its guests feel they were above the ground, above society, above anyone who couldn't afford to fly through the sky wrapped in silence. Ava Sinclair stepped in just as the first piano notes flowed from the cabin's hidden sound system. She wasn't in an evening gown. She wore no diamond necklace. No label screamed from her outfit. But every step she took quiet, deliberate, as if her heels were synced to a heartbeat commanded subtle attention. Not because she sought it, but because her silence carried weight. She wore a deep navy blazer, matching slacks, her hair pinned neatly. No jewelry, no phone in hand. She didn't straighten her jacket upon entering. She didn't glance around to find her seat. She simply walked directly to 1A, placed her small handbag at her feet, and sat down as if that seat was hers not just by ticket, but by instinct. Because it was. Her ticket had been booked in Advance B, a discreet, internal executive division, and the very jet she was sitting on, one of the assets she personally owned. But today, she hadn't come for special treatment. Not to inspect the crew, not to assert her position. Her purpose was much simpler, to experience the very brand she had built with her own hands in complete anonymity. Because no one understands the soul of a system like the one who's once been overlooked by it. Ava opened a slim, leather-bound notebook, flipping to a bookmarked page. Around her, passengers continued to board, the plush carpet muffling every step. An older couple passed by in a pale gray suit. She draped in a lavender cashmere shawl, knitting a half-finished scarf as they walked. They passed, without looking her way. And from the front of the cabin, a voice as sweet as molasses floated back. "Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, such a pleasure to see you again." The Callahans smiled, nodded, and found their seats. Ava observed them, then gave a soft, polite nod. No one returned it. Not out of rudeness, but because she gave them no reason to notice her. Or perhaps, the only person who did noticed her in quite a different way. Tina Holloway, the lead flight attendant, stood at the front of the cabin, her uniform sharp, lips painted crimson, hair pinned with precision. She surveyed the passengers like a connoisseur of couture, knowing exactly who deserved a smile and who merely a nod. When her eyes landed on Ava, they lingered just a beat too long, not out of recognition, but because Ava didn't look like anyone typically found in this space. No heavy makeup, no entourage, no branded aura glowing around her. Only a quiet, grounded presence that no training manual could ever teach. And that unsettled Tina. She approached. The smile once warm with other guests now thin as tracing paper beneath fluorescent light. "Madam, may I see your boarding pass?" "I checked in online," Ava replied, her voice soft as breath. Tina nodded, but her eyes continued scanning from Ava's handbag to her neatly pinned hair to the simple flats on her feet. In her gaze, there was no curiosity, only judgment. She didn't need to say more, because her look had already said it all. "You're not the kind of person we serve up here." Ava offered a faint smile, not to respond but as a well-practiced reflex, because she had seen that look too many times before. And perhaps that's exactly why she was here. Tina Holloway moved gracefully down the aisle, tray of still water in hand, her smile as thin and polished as pleated silk. She poured for each guest, starting with the Callahans, then row by row accompanied by the same rhythm, a courteous greeting, a slight upward glance of the eyes, a perfectly timed nod. Every motion rehearsed, as if in front of a mirror. No gesture wasted, no gaze omitted. But when she reached Ava's row, her steps faltered like a film reel, abruptly slowing before being sliced mid-frame. No greeting, no smile, no eye contact. Ava remained still, her eyes set on the window, but she noticed everything. The tray passed her as though she were an invisible space between two real passengers. The feeling wasn't new, but it was always just as cold. "Excuse me, may I have a glass of water?" Ava asked softly, without turning her head, without raising her voice. It was less a request and more a quiet reminder. "I'm here too." Tina paused. Her eyes flicked over, barely stopping. She responded like someone following a script she didn't like. "I'll come back when I'm free." Her words were clipped, each syllable sharp and precise yet devoid of the slightest warmth. Then she walked on, leaving behind a trail of air colder than the first-class cabin's climate control. Ava said nothing. She adjusted the lapel of her blazer, opened her book, and began to read as if nothing had happened. But the atmosphere had shifted. The silence around her was no longer peaceful. Eyes began to settle on her back, not long enough to be blatant, not short enough to be accidental. Some curious, some irritated, and some knowing well aware of what was happening, but choosing silence. Ava was used to that. Silence sometimes cuts deeper than accusation. Moments later, Ava gently stretched her legs. Not far. Just enough to ease the tension in her body. Just enough to reclaim a little stillness. And then Tina returned. This time, her steps were no longer soft as fabric. They were heavy, purposeful. Her high heels thudded against the thick carpet like hammers. As she neared Ava's seat, she veered deliberately to the side. And then it happened. The tray jolted. 2 glasses tipped. Water spilled. One glass's contents splashed directly onto Ava's skirt. The other hit the floor with a soaking slap against the carpet. "What kind of way is that to sit?" Tina snapped, voice shrill and cutting. "Your legs are all over the aisle. Look at what you've just caused." The entire cabin turned. Head swiveled. A blonde woman across the aisle leaned toward her husband, smirking as she whispered, "Maybe she's just angling for an upgrade?" Tina heard it, and as if fueled by it, she turned back to Ava, smirking. "Yeah, that tracks. Doesn't know the rules, doesn't know her place." Ava looked up. Her eyes held a slow, still sharpness, cold and deliberate, like a lake frozen midwinter. "You walked into my leg," she said calmly, each word steady. "And all I asked for was the same respect as anyone else." "Respect?" Tina scoffed, bitterly amused. "Respect goes both ways, and someone like you—" She didn't finish, because Ava's gaze had changed. Not in anger, not even contempt, just finality, as if a page had been turned and the story was already over. "Someone like me?" Tina sneered. "You don't belong up here." The air in the cabin collapsed. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out in a single breath. No more whispers. No more glasses clinking. Just a terrifying, cavernous silence. The kind only crowds can create when they realize they've just become witnesses. David Grant, the man seated across from Ava, leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" "Everything's fine," Ava replied gently, her eyes still locked on Tina. "Thank you." Tina turned sharply toward David, tone flaring. "We're handling a disruptive passenger. Please don't interfere." David raised an eyebrow. "From where I'm sitting, the only one being disruptive is you." A soft "oh" rippled from somewhere in the back. Tina flushed. She turned sharply to Ava again, her voice drawn tight like a string about to snap. "You're wasting my time and disturbing other passengers. If you don't move to the back, I'll have to call security." Ava tilted her head slightly. Her gaze didn't flinch, and her voice low, steady, unshakable, cut through the moment like a steel edge. "Call whoever you'd like. I'm not going anywhere." Tina narrowed her eyes. Her gaze now was no longer anger, but something deeper, more venomous. Hatred. A feeling mixed between the fear of losing power and the resentment that someone undeserving dared to disobey. And in a moment of losing control, she raised her hand and slapped. The slap rang out, sharp and dry like a gunshot in the middle of a quiet night. No one had time to stop it. No one thought it would happen, but it did. First class was stunned. A few people gasped, hands covering mouths. The blonde woman across the aisle gaped, her lips frozen mid-sour smile. David shot to his feet, eyes red with fury. Maya, the young flight attendant, covered her mouth, eyes wide, as if she had just witnessed something beyond anything training had ever prepared her for. And Ava? She didn't move, didn't pull back, didn't swat the hand away, didn't speak. She simply sat upright, calmly and deliberately, her hand resting lightly on her thigh as if to hold onto her composure, then lifted her head, her gaze slowly sliding across Tina's face like a thin blade gliding over skin. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," Ava said. Her voice wasn't loud, wasn't sharp, but each word landed like it had been forged in hot iron, searing into the air, leaving behind the scorched scent of a system that had just set itself on fire. Tina stepped back. Her breathing turned erratic. She was no longer in control of herself, but she hadn't surrendered either. Her face was a mixture of fear and a bewilderment at not understanding why she was afraid. Maya stepped forward, her professional instincts pulling her toward the woman who had just been struck. But Tina turned around, her eyes flashing a silent command. "Don't." Maya stopped. Her lips pressed tightly. She had seen clearly everything that had just happened. But this environment, the culture of silence and hierarchy she had survived in for 2 years, still had enough weight to hold her in place. David didn't. He didn't just stand, he stepped forward, a full step, his eyes alert, scanning both sides as if waiting for a signal. Not from Ava, but from justice itself. Ava remained still. No yelling. No tears. No trembling hands. She simply pulled out her phone, typed a few lines, her eyes unblinking, her wrist steady. She placed the device back on the armrest, like she'd just texted for coffee. No one knew what she had sent. But the air had changed. It was no longer, "What will she do now?" It was, "What's about to happen to everyone else?" In the cockpit, Captain Daniel Carter was reviewing flight parameters when his watch gave a soft vibration. A message appeared on a private screen, a secured priority channel used only by senior command, and one singular figure across the entire system, Ava Sinclair. He read the words, "Captain Carter, I am Ava Sinclair, owner of Aviair and the aircraft you are currently piloting. I have just been assaulted and publicly humiliated by the lead flight attendant in first class. No on-the-spot investigation. No justification needed. I request your presence immediately to witness the disciplinary action. This is no longer an internal incident. This is a direct order. As Daniel froze. He knew exactly what he needed to do. The captain unfastened his harness, turned to his first officer. You have the controls. I need to step out immediately. The first officer looked up, nodded once. No questions asked. Daniel straightened his collar, rested his hand on the door latch. This time, he wasn't stepping out as the man flying the plane. He was stepping out as the one tasked with upholding the very principle this airline was built on. Silence. Not the kind that comes from awkwardness or embarrassment, but the kind that thickens, stretches, lingers like all the air in first class had been vacuumed out in a single instant. The instant a black woman was slapped mid-air and no one had time to stop it. No one moved. No one dared touch anything. Everyone just sat back stiff, eyes flicking toward the woman seated upright in seat 1, where a blot of water still darkened the hem of a deep blue dress. Ava Sinclair did not bow her head. She didn't blink. She didn't even look surprised. She sat there as though she had been waiting for this moment, not to retaliate, not to make noise, but to prove a simple truth. Sometimes, you don't need to do anything for someone to expose themselves entirely. Tina Holloway, the lead flight attendant, stood frozen in place. Her hand still trembled not because of what she'd done, but because she was beginning to understand what exactly she had touched. Her eyes darted, not seeking support anymore, but searching desperately for somewhere to hide from the stares. She tried to keep her spine straight, but sweat was already sliding down her back. Then, just then, the cockpit door clicked open. Slow, unhurried. But every creak of the hinge felt like it split the air in half. Captain Daniel Carter stepped out. A tall, middle-aged man. His uniform was crisp, his gold-plated name tag gleaming under the cabin lights. His face was stern, his eyes fixed on Ava. He offered no nod to Tina, no polite greeting to passengers, no tray of drinks, no pleasantries. He only nodded quietly, slightly toward Ava, a silent gesture of respect. Then he turned to the entire cabin, stepped fully into the aisle, and his voice rang out, steady and clear, needing no microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a very important announcement to make. All eyes shifted forward. The sound of a purse being zipped ceased mid-motion. A glass of water quivered in a young man's hand, because this was no longer an ordinary flight. The woman you just witnessed being insulted, assaulted, is Mrs. Ava Sinclair. A few whispers broke loose. The blonde woman across the aisle froze, her expression drained of color. The hand that had been resting lightly on her husband's knee now recoiled as though it had touched fire. The captain paused a beat, then continued. Mrs. Sinclair is not simply a passenger like any other in this cabin. The air tightened. Someone mid-cabin audibly swallowed. She is the founder, the CEO, and the sole owner of the entire Aviair airline network. That includes the plane we're on. That includes every member of this crew. And yes, that includes me. A silence fell so deep, so vast it was as if the aircraft had lost gravity. David Grantha, man who had kept a calm gaze the entire time and nodded slowly, as though every missing piece had just clicked into place. His eyes shifted to Tina, then to Ava. No more questions. No need for explanations. And Tina, she stood frozen, speechless, nowhere to retreat. Her face had gone pale as paper. The same hand that had struck Ava just 10 minutes ago now shrank back, pressed tightly against her side, as if even the air around her refused to give her permission to touch anything again. She was no longer in first class. She was standing inside a silent courtroom, surrounded by witnesses, and the judge was seated upright in 1A, needing not a single word to pass judgment. Ava stepped forward, each step unhurried. She stood beside the captain. The overhead lighting bathed the deep blue of her blazer like a spotlight on the main character, one who had stayed quiet until the curtain was ready to fall. "I didn't plan for anyone to know who I was," she said, her voice calm as if merely making conversation, not raised, not punctuated. "I intended to quietly observe, to listen, to experience the service of my own company as an ordinary person." A few eyes dropped to the floor. She turned to Tina. Her gaze wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It carried only one thing: disappointment, the kind that's still and heavy and full of silence. The kind that belongs to someone who once believed and has just let go of that belief. "But thank you," Ava continued, "for making the truth so clear. I don't have to explain anything at all." Tina opened her mouth. A pause, brief, but visible. She looked as though she wanted to speak an apology, an excuse, a plea for redemption, but everything caught in a throat that had been trained for commands, and now knew only silence. Ava didn't wait for a response. She took a step back, turned around, and let her gaze sweep across the cabin like someone checking a room after the last person had left. She didn't seek affirmation. She didn't need applause. She simply said, "Luxury doesn't lie in the ticket price, or the seat, or the color of your skin, or the way you dress." She paused. Her eyes moved slowly from person to person. The young man in the corner, the blonde woman, Mr. and Mrs. Callahan. "It lies in how we treat each other, especially the ones whose names we don't know." No one responded. But this time, the silence wasn't complicity. It was listening. The captain nodded, then turned to Maya Alice, the young flight attendant, standing near the aisle, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if afraid she might accidentally do something wrong. "Effective immediately," he said. "Tina Holloway is suspended from duty. Maya will temporarily assume the role of lead flight attendant for the remainder of this flight." Maya's eyes widened. In that moment, she didn't know whether to breathe or cry. Then she clenched her fists, raised her head, and stepped forward. No deep no. No nervous thank you. She simply nodded, composed, respectful, as if she wasn't just accepting a new responsibility, but accepting the quiet trust that had just been handed to her by the woman standing before her. Ava gave her a small smile. Not a rewarding smile, not one of praise, just acceptance. Then she turned back towards seat 1A. This time, every passenger stood to give her space, not out of fear, not because anyone told them to, but because they knew they had just witnessed a woman who didn't need to shout, to make an entire system bow. Tina Holloway remained where she stood, frozen between two worlds. On one side, first class, a space she once believed she controlled entirely, and on the other, reality, where she was now just a woman who had slapped the founder of the very airline she worked for. She couldn't speak. The same commands she once delivered with ease were now lodged in her throat. The fingers that once held silver trays steady now trembled, as if that tray had shattered somewhere deep inside her. The captain gave a silent nod. From the back of the cabin, two members of internal security stepped forward. No rush, no commotion. Just two suited figures appearing as if they'd been waiting all along, as if justice had always been there, simply waiting for someone brave enough to summon it. They didn't use handcuffs. They didn't raise their voices. They simply stopped beside Tina and spoke just loud enough to be heard, calm and firm. "Miss Holloway, please come with us. Your actions are now under internal and criminal investigation." Tina's mouth opened slightly, as if to argue, to say something. But the gaze of the entire cabin rendered her mute. No one spoke. But it was that silence, from people who once smiled at her, who once answered her commands, that landed like the hardest slap of all. She had nowhere to lean, no policy left to hide behind, no protocol to shield her. She turned away. Her hair fell over her shoulders. Her heels struck the carpet softly, but each step seemed to pull something out of her, like someone descending from a position built on arrogance, now dismantled by consequence. The cabin door clicked shut behind her. Soft, but final. No one clapped. No one wished her well. Only a few quiet exhales of relief remained, and the steady hum of the engines, as if preparing to carry everything back onto its rightful course. Ava Sinclair remained seated. She didn't clap. She didn't smile in triumph. She didn't glance back at anyone. She simply turned to Maya Ellis, the young flight attendant, still visibly shaken, and gave a small, calm nod. "From now on, this flight is yours." Maya stepped forward. Her hands tightened. Her face flushed slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of someone finally believing in her. I'll do my best, Mrs. Sinclair." Ava shook her head gently, a soft smile forming. "No need to call me that." She paused. "Just remember this. Kindness doesn't have a seat class." Maya nodded. No more words were needed. She returned to her position, adjusting her uniform like it was part of a quiet, personal ritual. This time, no one had to tell her what to say. But she stepped forward anyway, drew in a breath, and turned to the cabin with a voice steadier than she ever imagined she had. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the crew, I'd like to apologize for the earlier incident. The flight is now stable, and I promise every passenger on this plane will be treated with the dignity they deserve." Applause followed, not all at once, not in unison, just scattered claps here and there from those who had been silent, now speaking in the only way they could. An older woman placed her hand gently over her husband's. A young man in the back straightened in his seat. They didn't need to look at each other, they agreed. Everyone in that cabin understood. They hadn't just witnessed a termination. They'd witnessed something far bigger. Ava leaned back into her seat. She reopened the same book from earlier, laid her hand on the marked page but didn't read. Her eyes drifted to the window, to the endless blue outside, vast, silent, still like herself, like the dream she once nurtured of an airline where anyone could board without having to prove they were enough. She didn't need to do anything more. No speeches, no closing statements for the audience, because the truth had already spoken. And this time, no one could silence it. The flight landed in the soft hue of late afternoon, the sky ablaze with streaks of amber as if nature itself had paused its restless rhythm to reflect on what had just unfolded high above the clouds. The aircraft touched down so gently it was easy to forget that it had just carried a storm that would ripple through an entire system for years to come. Passengers disembarked one by one. There was no jostling, no impatient shuffling, no loud farewells echoing down the aisle as usual. Each step down the aircraft stairs that day was slower than usual, as if everyone was carrying something too deep to express in words. Ava Sinclair was the last to step off. No bodyguards, no assistants, no welcome party, no clicking cameras. Just a woman in a tailored blazer, a small bag in hand, her hair neatly pinned back, and a gaze that was both calm and distant. But this time, she wasn't anonymous. No one blocked her path. No one looked at her like a guest who'd wandered into the wrong cabin. Every eye turned toward her no longer with suspicion, but with a quiet recognition that could only be described as respect. A respect not born from her title, but from the way she had made an entire cabin reflect on itself. That evening, Ava received over 300 messages from all over, from rival airlines extending private meeting invitations, from passengers who had been on that very flight, people she had once thought were indifferent, and from black women she had never met, reaching out on social media with quiet, private messages that read, "You did what so many of us couldn't, and you did it with dignity." Ava didn't respond to them all. She simply read. Then she closed her phone. But the look in her eyes grew deeper, as if each message carved a small mark, a reminder that what she did today didn't end on that airplane. A few months later, Ava Sinclair boarded another flight. Same airline, her airline. Still first class. Still seat 1A. But this time, there was nothing to test, no hidden assessment. No more watching to see who would smile, who would walk past. She was, simply, a passenger in every sense of the word. A young flight attendant approached, eyes warm with sincerity, voice soft like early morning light. Good afternoon, ma'am. Wishing you a very comfortable flight. Would you prefer warm lemon water or ginger tea? Ava smiled. She didn't say who she was. She didn't need to. Because this time, she knew that look wasn't for the boss. It was for a person. She sat down, quietly reopened her old book. Same familiar leather cover, same bookmarked page. But this time, no one interrupted. No suggestion to move seats. No eyes scanning her shoes for a designer label. No silent question. Are you sure you're in the right cabin? Only silence. And a feeling. For the first time, the system didn't need to recognize someone to treat them right. Ava didn't lift her head anymore. No need to observe. No need to listen closely. She read a few lines, then closed the book not because she was disturbed, but because she was finally relaxed. And for Ava, that was enough. Not because she had been welcomed, but because she didn't have to earn being welcomed. True change was never in the title, never in the powerful press conference voice. It began in the first glance when one person looks at another, without measuring their worth. When that becomes instinct within a system, when no one needs a title to be addressed with dignity, when kindness isn't reserved for appearance then, and only then, the black woman who once sat alone in seat 1A can finally leave the sky behind. Not because she has been seen, but because respect has stayed.